Confidence in the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic has declined significantly in the last year. This is based on the findings of the latest RGR Gleaner Don Anderson poll conducted August 17 to September 3 among 1,003 Jamaicans. More from Debbie Wright. Pollster Don Anderson says when Jamaicans were asked to rate the government's handling of the pandemic, more of them gave a positive rating than those that gave a negative one. He says 41% said the government's performance was good or very good.
33% of all persons interviewed rated the government's performance as average, neither good, neither bad, right? What's interesting to note is that 28% rated the performance of the government in how they handled the pandemic as being good, and another 13% said it was very good. So when you combine those two positives, you have 41% of all persons who considered the government's performance in the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic as being positive. On the other hand, we had a total of 26% who rated the performance as negative. So 11% thought it was very poor, and 15% thought it was poor. So 26% negative. There are more persons who feel the government is performing well or gave the government a positive rating.
However, this year's rating contrasts with last July's finding when 37.4% of all persons interviewed said the government was doing a very good job, and another 36% said they were doing a good job, for an overall 73.4% positive score. At that time, only 7.4% of respondents to the poll said the government had done a poor or very poor job, compared to 26% this year. The latest poll numbers come at a time when the country is experiencing its third and worst yet wave of the pandemic, forcing the government to institute no-movement days. Anderson says the Jamaicans surveyed are blaming the spike in COVID-19 infections on citizens for the most part.
It's interesting to note that from the general public's perspective, 66% of all persons interviewed said the citizens are to be blamed. Now, in this particular issue, they gave more than one answer. So when the data is adding back to more than 100%, it means that some person gave more than one answer. So taking into consideration that 66% of the citizens say that the citizens themselves are to blame for the spike, we now move to the second most important factor that was mentioned, and 46% of all persons interviewed say the government is responsible. Over and above that, 13% blame businesses, 4% said no one in particular, and 1% talk in terms of the early border opening, visitors and foreigners, and they weren't sure, another 1%.
Pollster Don Anderson, Debbie Wright reporting for Radio Jamaica News. In the meantime, as the country awaits word from the government on whether the current weekly lockdowns will be extended, the measure appears to have the support of most Jamaicans. Weekly 3-day lockdowns have been in place since the middle of August. The measure is set to expire Wednesday morning. Pollster Don Anderson says despite debates about the effectiveness of the lockdowns, most support the no-movement days.
This has been a hotly debated issue. There are those who feel, clearly it should be, and those who feel it shouldn't be. Well, what does the scientific data say? 54%, majority, but just the majority, say that locking down the country on weekends is a good idea, and say it's a good idea. It's run across the entire demographic perspective, profile, age groups, gender, etc. 35%, however, not surprising, felt that it was not a good idea because we hear the concerns about weekend lockdowns and the impact it is having on businesses and public and personal life.
Mr. Anderson says the data could bolster the government's confidence in continuing with the measure.
If they are ones that base their decision making on scientific data, it would say that it gives them ammunition for going forward with weekend lockdowns, because the majority of the country feels that it's a good idea. We're saying marginally majority is 54%, but it does give them the kind of support to say, well, the public generally feels that's a good idea to lock the country down. But again, there's strong opposition. So a lot depends on what are the pressure groups. The Prime Minister already alluded to pressure groups, which convince him to do certain things and take certain decisions. 35% of the people interviewed don't think it's a good idea. So there is enough ground there for the government to continue and to gain confidence from what the data says, that they can continue to, implement the weekend lockdowns for as long as they think it is necessary.
Pollster Don Anderson. And Mr. Anderson says most Jamaicans said they thought the quarantining of specific parishes was effective in containing the spread of COVID-19.
61% of the total number of persons interviewed say that quarantining specific parishes was an effective way of dealing with the COVID situation. Against that, 39% did not agree that it was ineffective. So again, this is another positive rating for the government in addition to the overall assessment of how they handled the pandemic. 61% are of the view that the government quarantining certain parishes was in fact an effective way to kind of challenge and work against the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Pollster Don Anderson. Last year, the entire parish of St. Catherine was placed on quarantine to contain the COVID-19 numbers. This year, tighter curfew measures were imposed in Westmoreland as COVID-19 cases spiked there.